If you keep accidentally getting gluten, you're missing this key thing on nutrition labels. Gluten will never be listed on a label. Instead, it often might say things like malt from barley, brewer's yeast, modified food starch, things like that. All of these are forms of gluten that may not stick out as obvious when you're reading a food label. When you pick up a packaged food, the ingredient list is going to be a good starting point for you. In the US, the FDA requires manufacturers to list all ingredients in descending order by weight. So what's most used first is going to be on the top of the list. If an ingredient is derived from a major allergen, it must be declared in parentheses next to the food, such as flour, parentheses, wheat, or a contains statement underneath the ingredient list. For example, contains soy, wheat. However, gluten is not itself considered a major allergen in the US under the current labeling laws. Yes, wheat is considered an allergen, but gluten itself is not, which means you won't always see the word as gluten labeled under these allergens, even if it's there. Give this video a like if you think gluten should be labeled as a major allergen within the US. The top 8 major allergens that are listed, though, are wheat, milk, eggs, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, and as of 2023, sesame was added as the 9th major allergen. So if a product contains wheat, that will be listed in either the ingredients section as an allergen or as an allergen statement below. But barley and rye, 2 other gluten sources, don't fall under these rules, so they will not be called out as having a major allergen like gluten in there. Another area to keep an eye out for are the sources of hidden gluten, such as soy, bouillon cubes, seasonings, and natural flavors. These are all things that can be listed as ingredients, but you don't need to go into detail when they contain things like gluten. So yes, this is why you might be accidentally getting gluten from something, even though on the outside, the ingredient label says it's gluten-free. Comment glutened below if you've ever been glutened by a product that you really thought was safe to eat based on looking at the ingredient labels. We've all been there before. So how do we get around this and not stress ourselves out? For starters, the certified gluten-free logo is going to be your new best friend. What is the certified gluten-free logo? These are third-party organizations that have helped certify the products that you are buying to be gluten-free. Generally speaking, these are much stricter rules than the FDA labeling requirements, and it meets the following requirements. A strict gluten threshold, and it's usually less than 10 or 20 parts per million of gluten. Cross-contamination prevention practices, and ingredient sourcing and manufacturing standards. These companies require factory tours, factory inspections, and ingredient testing done every so often to ensure that the products being made are safe for even those with the most severe of gluten sensitivities. Now here's the catch. Products can be labeled as gluten-free without being certified, but at this point you're relying on the company's word, not the inspections and not the lab testing. That means it could still result in you experiencing gluten symptoms, such as sickness, etc. This is due to cross-contamination that may be happening. While the company that produces the product may not be directly putting gluten in that product, therefore making it free of gluten, it doesn't necessarily mean it's being made in a factory that is certified gluten-free, and there is a possibility of cross-contamination happening. The certified gluten-free labels are going to be your best bet on ensuring gluten-free safety when you are buying products. However, there is other research that can be done to help ensure that something is gluten-free and is safe to eat if it doesn't have the certified gluten-free label on it. This is the exact kind of information I cover inside of my Going Gluten-Free Getting Started ebook. Not only does it help talk about reading food labels, but we talk a little bit more about cross-contamination, label guides, and beginner-friendly tips that can help you get started on a gluten-free diet super easily. Most companies have an allergen section of their website where you're able to go and double down your research on gluten and gluten-free. However, remember, gluten is not listed as a major allergen, so a lot of companies will not call that out. Yet, these days, the gluten-free diet is becoming more common the more we know about gluten and its effect on people, so a lot of companies are starting to call this out with more information. If you have further questions, reach out to the company. The worst they can say is, yeah, we do manufacture gluten products on the same carousel. You need to avoid this product if you are celiac or severely gluten sensitive. You can also download an app on your phone that will help you scan food products in the grocery store to see if they are gluten-free or meet any other allergens. These apps are wonderful for name brand products, but they won't necessarily cover those that are made by smaller companies or products made in the store itself. So for example, if you're shopping the deli and your local grocery store has a homemade pasta salad, that is not going to be on the app, and there is not going to be an easy way to scan it and ensure that it is gluten-free. In that case, you need to decide whether it's worth it to risk eating the gluten or not. Generally speaking, it's not. There are going to be foods that you can track down an entire ingredient list for and go through ingredient by yourself and figure out whether they're gluten-free or not. But it's not always going to happen, and that's just part of being gluten-free. There are going to be foods you're going to have to skip out of the safety for yourself. Reading labels isn't just avoiding wheat, as we have talked about in this video. It's learning how gluten hides, and over time, you will get used to this process. You'll start to find gluten-free products that you love and products that you know that you can trust that are always gluten-free. However, I will continue to caution you that sometimes products change. Sometimes products lose their gluten-free certification. When you are buying a product, even if you know it's safe, always double check for that gluten-free logo so you know that it is still safe. Even though the box you bought 2 weeks ago, you know it was safe, you never know what's happened in those 2 weeks with production. If you're ready to get your gluten-free kitchen set up, watch the next video about cross-contamination and building out your gluten-free space.